My name is Richard Howard. I'm head of the Environment and Energy Unit at Policy Exchange. I'm here to talk to you today about our new report, Warmer Homes, which looks at the problem of fuel poverty. So fuel poverty is defined as the inability to afford to heat your home to an adequate standard. According to government data, there are 2.3 million households in England alone that fall into this definition. Fuel poverty is often thought of as being a problem affecting older people, pensioners, but actually government data shows there are over 1.1 million working households that are fuel poor. Fuel poverty has been made worse in recent years, essentially because of rising energy prices. Fuel bills have gone up, in some cases by a factor of 2 in the last decade in real terms. And it's also made worse by the fact that the UK has a very old housing stock, which is very inefficient. A lot of fuel poor households live in inefficient properties, and particularly older properties, and rural areas are particularly affected. The government consulted on a new fuel poverty strategy for England last year, in the back end of 2014. And this sets a new target to try and essentially move all fuel poor households to an energy efficiency band C, which is seen as an appropriate level, by 2030. So all 2.3 million households move to that benchmark by 2030. This is quite an ambitious plan, more ambitious than the plans before it. But actually we see that based on current interventions, current policies, the government is going to fall well short of this target. So our analysis in this report, essentially we've picked through the current set of policies and identified that current government spending amounts to around £500 million a year in England in upgrading the energy efficiency of fuel poor homes. But actually the required level of spending is in the order of £1.2 billion a year. So that shows that there's a funding gap of around £700 million a year. So we've looked at a range of different options for how we can meet this funding gap, bridge the funding gap. We don't think it's plausible to ask for additional spending in this area given the sort of economic and budgetary situation, and neither is it appropriate to put additional costs onto house payers, bill payers, bills, because budgets are already tight, household budgets are already tight. So we've looked at other ways in which you can address this funding gap. The first of those is actually to try and focus more of the energy efficiency spending, which is already going on the fuel poor. So we think that there's the opportunity to move around £300 million of spending which currently goes to all households and move that to fuel poor households and focus on those households instead. The second thing we would do, or we would recommend, is to focus some of the other fuel poverty policies and focus those on energy efficiency measures specifically. So quite a lot of the money which is notionally badged as being about fuel poverty essentially goes on cash payments to households. So this is the winter fuel payment and the warm home discount and the cold weather payment. It amounts to over £2.5 billion of spend per year, and we think with just some modest changes to that, savings of around £500 million could be made, and that money could instead be used for energy efficiency improvement. The third thing we would recommend is to actually really start to think of energy efficiency as an infrastructure investment. So it's not been thought of as an infrastructure investment historically, but homes are an important part of social infrastructure, and we think that they should be viewed in this way by the government, by Treasury. So we think actually energy efficiency should be viewed as a top 40 infrastructure investment, and we think that the government should allocate some of its infrastructure budget, which amounts to £100 billion over the next Parliament, to energy efficiency. You can read the full report online at www.policyexchange.org.uk.